millennials, the Gen Zs of the world expect you to have some type of online presence, whether it's a podcast, social media, whatever you're doing, you have to be engaged in social media. So podcasting is one of the easiest ways, but there's other ways as well. But what my point is, Erik, is that if you don't have some semblance of a personal brand, meaning an online reputation, if you don't have those breadcrumbs that lead to you and your business, they're going to go to the next CPA. They're going to go to the next attorney, the next real estate investor, because that person has credibility in their minds, to the Gen Z and the millennials, because it's required at this point. So the boomers, the Gen Xers like myself, maybe we kind of feel, or they think that it's a vanity thing, but it's not to the next, the generation that's going to make all the financial decisions over the next 20 to 30 years. They expect you to have your online reputation, your personal brand, your podcast, whatever it is. So kudos to that guy if he's asking. So the podcast thing, it's really just committing to the idea of being consistent. So like once you jump in, you can't jump in and then say, this doesn't feel like what I want to do anymore, and then I'm out. They call that pod fade. Typically 7 to 8 episodes, you don't get past that. And that's okay. You tried it, it wasn't for you, then you move on. But I highly recommend people out there, once you commit to creating a podcast and a brand, there's a lot of work that's done. It's like buying an asset, buying an apartment building, and then you put all this work in and you close the deal and you got everything done. Now the work begins, right? You wanted to pop the champagne, sure, but now you got to really work. So it's the same thing. You start a podcast, it's a lot of work. So why would you just leave it an empty building, an empty shell? You want to continue to see it eventually perform for you.
Oh, that's such good advice. I mean, so when I started this podcast, this will be episode 77 or 78 or so. When I started this, basically I asked that same question of anyone I knew who had a podcast or any producer I could find. I said, what's the main piece of advice? And they say, stick with it. Do it consistently and for a long period of time. So I was like, that was this fear of like, what if I hate it? It turns out I love it. And I'm being totally genuine. I think some people think it's a grind. For me, I love it. I'm like you. I get to get people like you on my show, ask the questions I want to hear. It's really exciting actually still. But my goal was, like it or not, I'll do 50 episodes. I'm going to do a year's worth and see what it looks like. And I was like, hell bent to get there. And that's the piece of advice I still give to people. So I'm kind of glad to hear you say that. Is like, do it, man. If you're going to do it, go all the way in. Don't record a few because it looks even worse. You got 3 episodes from 3 years ago and it's still on your website. That's not really helpful in my opinion. So I love to hear that.